Welcome back. Yes, still continuing our conversation on rape and the incidents of rape that's sort of bedeviled the country in the last couple of days. And I have here with me Mr. Muyiwa Agunbero, who's a lawyer. Thanks for joining us today. And I just want to look at the legal side of things, because that seems to be the constant conversation. And I was talking with some guests earlier, and the issue of proof seems to be the toughest one. It looks like a lot of people never bother reporting these cases because there doesn't seem to be, conviction rates of rape in Nigeria is abysmal, to put it mildly. How do we start to do better with that?
Well, like you said, rape is a very sensitive thing, and the requirement, what you have to prove is a little bit big, or how do I put it? Yeah. You have to prove, first of all, prove beyond reasonable doubt. Then the issue is, what evidence have you got? Now, when it comes to rape, you need medical evidence that you have to prove before the courts. Now, medical evidence has to be taken about almost immediately when the incident happened. So there seems to be a lot of lag in between when the offense is committed and when they are reported. Now, when you have that kind of lag, automatically it's difficult for you to secure conviction. So because people don't report, they don't seek for help, they don't go to medical places, NGOs that can help them in situations like that, to give them what they can do and how to go about it. So that lag seems to give many of the accusers an opportunity to get away with some of those cases.
I mean, the burden of proof is on the accuser, or the victim, let's just put it that way. Is there any way these things can start to shift a little to the person who's accused? I know you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but is there, why some people believe, why is there no burden at all on the perpetrators?
Well, it's not like there's no burden at all on the perpetrator, but what you have to do first, because you are the one making the complaint, you are the one making the allegation, you have to establish what you have said. So it then puts the obligation on the prosecutor to, first of all, establish that that incident happened. Well, it's not, at that point, it might not be beyond reasonable doubt yet. So we have what we call the imaginary scale, which the judges have to use. They will put the evidence of the prosecutor on one side, and then once the scale is tilting one way, then the burden shifts to the to the complainant, to the accused person, to now prove, more or less like tilting the balance to his own side. So it's not like the accused doesn't have anybody to prove anything at all. It's just that you have to establish your own case first, and then before they then discharge the body.
Yeah, and we also talked about the age of consent earlier, and the legislation, I guess, the burden is on legislation. But I mean, the courts also make laws. Is this something that we think is going to change anytime soon? Because there's an argument that as long as the age of consent in a lot of parts of Nigeria is 11, certain things will still be gotten away with. Because, to be honest, can a child give consent, How do we start to have that conversation with our legislators or even the courts to start shifting this?
Unfortunately, things like that, things very fundamental as age of consent, has to be by statute. We already have statute that fix those age of consent as a certain limit. So there must be a law that will have to amend those laws and put them where they're supposed to be. A judge cannot just wake up and say, probably out of judicial activism, and say, oh, because I feel that the justice of this case deserves for the age to be lowered. A judge cannot do that. So that's when we need the legislature, the National Assembly, and the houses of assemblies to come into, to assist in making the case a lot easier for people to be able to prove all these things.
Yeah, and there's so many laws. I mean, we had so many sexist laws. For the longest time, you couldn't get a Nigerian passport without your husband approving. Some of these things boggle the mind that this is 2020 and these things still exist. What can Nigerians do to sort of put pressure on their legislatures? Because, I mean, lawyers can only do their part in the courtroom, but the legislature is also filled with lawyers.
Yes,
and, a good number of people who are lawmakers are lawyers. And so Nigerians wonder, how can we do more to, sort of put pressure on these people as lobbyists, for example?
What we have to continue to do is to demand of our lawmakers to represent us. If you look at the mode of the country today, everybody's clamoring for one form of reform or the other for sexual offenses. And we have to keep pressure on them to make the right laws. It's not just when we're talking about how to pass the budget and all of those things. We should start talking about things that affect the lives of everybody. And these are very basic issues. So we just have to keep pressure on them for them to amend all these laws.
Yeah. And with the courts itself, I mean, we'll still go back to the first question I asked with regards to proof. A lot of people see and hear certain things, but the laws are still a certain way. You know, we're talking about the burden of proof. Are there reforms that can be done with regards to what the burden of proof will be? There was a pretty popular case from, I think, last year with Busola Dakolo and the pastor from Koza. You know, the judgment, or there was an injunction or whatever it was, and it turns out that he was basically exonerated from everything. That's not to say that he was guilty, but a lot of people wondered, how did we reach that judgment? The victim is still claiming that, you know, what happened happened. You know, how do we start to settle that sort of dichotomy where we feel like the laws are still not reflective of, you know, supporting victims?
You know, what we have to bear in mind is that law is, as they call it, three-way justice. Yes. Justice to the accused, to the state, and to the complainant. So if you amend the law one way to suit probably the victim today, anybody can be a victim of a false accusation. So the law still has to be fair. So there has to be a balance with what we do. And with the case that you mentioned, the Dakolo's case, I think, like what I said before, there's a lag between when the incident happened and when...
so it's harder to prove cases like that.
It's just difficult to come to grips with that. So there could be reforms that have to be looked into to see whether how we can do this thing. But the best thing is still to make sure that evidence is taken as soon as the incident happened, so that even if prosecution is not going to happen immediately, but it's preserved until a later stage, that when the complainant wants to take up a charge against the accused, and then you have an easier burden to discharge. Yeah,
people who have said the death penalty should be issued for people who are found guilty of rape. You know, do you think the punishment or the punitive measures out there for rape rapists are stringent enough?
Well, there's been a clamor for removal of death penalties all around the world. But in the last 2 or 3 years, I see it coming back. People now saying, oh, death penalty seems to be what should be the appropriate punishment for certain offenses and all that. I can, you know, without what the victims are going through is a lot. And you can tell somebody that has been through it to say that death penalty is not suitable for that kind of offense. But, you know, we have to pull all these things through the system and see what is appropriate for what. So we can't just start clamoring for death penalty for them. There are systems, there are ways to measure what is appropriate for each offense, and we just have to make sure that when we want to reform the law, it goes through that process again and be sure of what we are doing.
And just before we go now, if someone who's watching now who's raped, male or female, what should you do? What are the legal what's the legal way to go about things?
For me, I think the very first thing that you have to do is, there are two of them. You probably need to go and make a complaint at the police station. They might then refer you to the appropriate government hospital or where they think evidence can be taken immediately. And I've seen people advocating that even when an offense like that happens, don't change your clothes. Don't change anything. Go like that. Make a report so that they can take the evidence as it is. So you need to get in contact with the law enforcement agencies. And also, I'm aware of non-government organizations that are into things like this. They have experience. They have the contact. If you don't want to go to the police station, get in contact with NGOs who can take up the case for you and fight for you. So that's what I would advise. Thank
you very much. Don't stay silent. I know it's a very hard sort of crime to report, especially for victims, but most importantly, if you can, speak to somebody. If you don't feel like you can go directly to the authorities, there's so many non-governmental organizations out there who support rape victims. And men, please stop raping.